starting a recording here, and my guests are Cyndi Steele, wife of Edgar Steele, Wesley Hoyt. Go ahead, Wesley. Tell us what is happening here.
Okay. The nickel version is that on June 11th, 2010, so just 10 months ago, Edgar Steele was arrested at his home by FBI agents in cooperation with Idaho State Patrol. They live in, Ed and Cyndi Steele live in northern Idaho in a small town called Sago, and it's near, just north of Coeur d'Alene and the Spokane area, just to give you an idea, close to the Canadian border. And Edgar is a First Amendment attorney who has defended numerous individuals on their First Amendment constitutional rights, and specifically, Edgar has represented a number of people pro bono. In other words, he's extended himself, given his legal services for free to a number of people so that they would have a defense. Now, he himself is under attack. These are false charges that the government has brought against him. We now have the absolute proof that the whole case is a sham. The government did a good job of inventing a case and fabricating a case, but not good enough. And what happened was on the 9th and 10th of June, they took some recordings of Edgar, supposedly at least, and they sent in a confidential informant. And on the 8th of June, you got to get the time sequence here, which is really important. On the 8th of June, this confidential informant supposedly went to the government. His attorney, who is an acting state judge, which is really a huge conflict of interest. But in any event, his attorney contacted the FBI and said that his client, this man named Larry Fairfax, wanted to, quote, come forward. Well, this man manufactured a bomb, that is a lethal pipe bomb, installed it on Cyndi Steele's car on the 28th day of May, when actually he did it on the 27th. She left on the 28th, and she traveled almost 500 miles to the Portland area to go and care for her mother. And then his concept was he was going to blow up Cyndi Steele, and he was going to make it appear that he had been hired to do that, all to cover up the theft of about $45,000 in silver bullion. The Steeles had put their retirement savings into silver bullion, and he, Larry Fairfax, was the handyman, and he figured out where they had hidden it. And so after he stole it, he needed a way to cover it up. And so he invented this plot. And on the 8th of June, he's coming forward. Remember now, this is a judge telling the FBI, I've got a client who's going to come forward with criminal information about criminal activity. And he comes forward and doesn't tell the FBI about the bomb. Instead, what he tells the FBI is that Mr. Steele, supposedly, was plotting to murder his wife and mother-in-law by having them run off the road. He never bothered to mention the bomb for 6 days. He never bothered to mention the bomb. And Cyndi Steele is now over in Oregon, and she gets a visitation on the 11th, the day that her husband's arrested. The FBI comes to her mother's house and tells her that she and her mother are the targets of an intended murder, and they take their telephones, their cell phones, away from these women, and they keep them there, busy with a big story about, you're going to be run off the road, and we're going to protect you, and blah, blah, blah. Meanwhile, they were preventing Mrs. Steele from calling her husband to say, what's up? So they go to Mr. Steele's house on the 11th of June, and at the same time that Mrs. Mrs. Steele and her mother are, in a sense, under house arrest because their phones have been taken away from them, and they're scared out of their minds because the FBI doesn't just come to your door every day and tell you a story like that. So at the same time, they swoop in, they confront Edgar Steele, and they tell him that his wife has been murdered. She's been run off the road, and they also tell him that his mother-in-law has been shot, and they just fabricate this big plot, and Mr. Steele understandably breaks down. He cries because, after first being incredulous and checking it out, and finally, there's state cops and there's FBI and they're confirming, and, he's overwhelmed. Well, they now say that that's evidence of his guilt, that he cried when he planned to, quote, cry when he got the news that how stupid is that? If anybody is notified that their closest loved one has been murdered or dies, they're immediately going to have that kind of emotional reaction. But the FBI says, no, that's suspicious behavior, that's confirmation that Edgar Steele is guilty. Well, they're just plain stupid. This doesn't even make sense. So, but the thing is on the 11th of June, supposedly their confidential informant, the only one who stood to profit from this whole deal, Mr. Larry Fairfax, had not bothered to tell them about the bomb which not only endangered Cyndi Steele, not only endangered her mother and every person at, around, or near the car, but every village, town, business, community, school that she drove past would be subject to the same danger. And if that bomb went off, it was the largest bomb the ATF had ever seen, the largest pipe bomb they had ever seen. And if it had gone off, the devastation, the, quote, collateral damage, the number of people injured and killed by that could have been in the hundreds. And maybe even more than that if you consider a really tight-knit downtown community of a large city. Little children walked by that car because they went to Cyndi's mother's dance school. Little children and their moms, and the danger that this posed, and the FBI didn't even bother to tell her, to warn her. She drove all the way back from Oregon with the same bomb on her car, got back on the Sunday the 13th, was supposed to go to court on the 14th, and I'll tell you that story later, but court was canceled for the 14th, so she went to court on the 15th. On her way to court, when she had a few hours to kill, she stopped off at a oil change garage. At the oil change garage, the guy looks under the car and says, ma'am, please come here. There's something under your car. She checks it out, and she goes, oh, my goodness, they call the bomb squad. They shut down the highway. The bomb squad takes the bomb, and they put it into a canister, and then they use a water cannon to neutralize it. It was a very scary deal. And they even tried to blame Mrs. Steele. Initially, they thought she was a suspect somehow or other. The case gets crazier and the story gets more complex. But the FBI has been peddling these tapes, trying to say that, or recordings, I should say, they're trying to say that they have the voice of Edgar Steele plotting to murder his wife, and the recordings are nothing but a bunch of splices of conversations that who knows who had the conversations or where they were created voice morphing, what they did. It's so bizarre. There are hundreds of these splices throughout these tapes, these recordings, and it's so the story is so ridiculous, Clay, that even a third grader could figure out the government is committing fraud. So Cyndi Steele and her husband are facing a trial. Cyndi, of course, is the victim, the, quote, intended victim. She's completely 100% behind her husband. She has said repeatedly, and she'll tell you in a minute herself, that she believes her husband is completely innocent. And not only that, She is helping to raise money for him. And Clay, if that's something you could help us do, if you could put out the word on your radio show and invite people to contribute to the Edgar Steele Defense Fund, that would be very helpful, because we have some very expensive experts, witnesses to pay for, that are able to testify that these recordings are phonies. But look, this stuff costs money, and we're shy about $40,000 right now of being able to pay the bills, and the trial starts on the 26th of April. And so anything that you could do, getting out the address where they can mail in a check, or the website, or any of that, would be very, very helpful. So thank you for giving me a moment to speak.
Yeah, absolutely. Wesley, you and Edgar Steele have stepped up to the plate. Edgar, I remember when he was trying to defend the Christies who had their children stolen, and he's really done a lot. He's been on my show a number of times, and all of my shows are archived, so they could have put his voice together on these tapes, just going to my website, and he's done. And I'm just one of the hundreds of shows that he's done across the country. And I've got your address up here. You also came to the defense of Donna Taylor and Mark Taylor, and I've got the information up for where they can make donations to their site at Wells Fargo. If you will send me an email on that by the time this show goes up, I'll have all the information on my main page where people can contribute. And if we don't contribute, if we don't help with this, people like Edgar and I are the canaries in the coal mines, in my estimation. It may be happening to us right now, but the strategy that they're using can be used on anybody across America. I think the war on terror is simply a war against anybody that doesn't want to go along with this one world government, one world banking order.
Clay, may I comment? I think you're exactly right. They're just picking off people who are politically incorrect, who don't go along with the politically correct, and they're just nailing innocent people. And you have to let me say this. The U.S. government has now developed something called the American prison industry, and it's profitable for them to put innocent people in jail. They're putting as many innocent people in jail as they possibly can. Why? Because they have to pay for the revenue bonds that were issued to build the prisons, and the money that's used to maintain those prisons and pay the salaries and so on. They have to have warm bodies in jail so that they can draw tax dollars, which is revenue, and that revenue is then used to make the payments on these bonds. If they don't do it, it puts the international bankers out of business. They don't like that. So it's really behind this whole one world order scheme are the international bankers who have created these bond funds that have to be repaid, and they're now they're monetizing the system on the backs of the middle class. They're pulling people out of America, stuffing them in prison, innocent people, so that they can have the warm bodies there in prison, and they can draw the tax money to pay back the bonds. And guess what? You don't even have to be a high-profile person anymore. You don't have to be a conscientious objector. You don't have to be an Edgar Steele who calls them on their on all of their dirty tricks. You just have to be standing there, and when they level their sights on you, you're done. Unless we get some traction here, unless we can prove that the government did it, and then we can use this information that the government just cooked up a fraud to nail Edgar Steele, and just because they didn't like him. If we can do that, then we can begin to use that and demand that Congress change the laws, because there are a lot of phony baloney laws that Congress has passed. They've allowed the U.S. Department of Justice lobbyists to influence them improperly into passing these phony baloney laws, and you can be convicted for doing nothing. There are hearsay crimes that just can be invented out of whole cloth, and there are no controls on that whatsoever. There's the case of David Hinkson, where a man is a complete liar. He's already been convicted of lying, perjury, forgery, for all the things that he said in the David Hinkson trial. He's even been to prison, this liar, this confidential informant. And yet, Clay, it's amazing. They will not release David Hinkson. They're holding him in prison. His case sits right now in front of the United States Supreme Court, waiting for a grant of the writ of certiorari to have the case reviewed. And it's based on the fact that there's absolute proof that the whole case against David Hinkson was a complete forgery. It was manufactured, it was created, it was fictionalized by the government. We all know that. The record proves it, but the court, so far, the lower courts, won't let him go.
It's, yeah, we've got 1 in every 31 Americans in prison on parole or on probation. Wesley, that's more than any communist country out there. That's more than Red China. And the state of Arizona, I saw an ad that they had in here that says, we make more than just license plates. They're actually competing with private industries using this prison labor, aren't they? Are you there, Wesley?
I am.
Okay. I mean, they are... Well, it's for profit. Like you said, it's on the stock markets here. And, Cyndi, there's another toll here that we're not really talking about, and that's the victims of this persecution and prosecution are the families. The families. I mean, you haven't done nothing wrong. Your mother-in-law hasn't done nothing wrong. Edgar hasn't done nothing wrong. But you are being punished for it too, aren't you? Cyndi, are you there? I may have... Cyndi,
I can attest to the fact. See, I represent Cyndi pro bono. In other words, I started representing her last August.
Okay. Cyndi, I had you cut off there. I'm sorry, dear. Are you still there? You still with me? Can you hear me?
I'm still here.
Okay. I'm sorry, dear. I just had you. I had you muted there for a moment. But tell me about what's the effect been on you? How are you holding up? And you know, Mark Taylor, that Wesley represents, also. You know, he was put in prison, held for a year before we could get him out, and before Wesley got him out. But you know, his mother went through hell trying to do this. I can't even imagine what you're going through. But if you could tell us, I'd appreciate that.
Well, you know, I am sure that Mark Taylor's mom has gone through hell, because that's what I feel like I'm being put through. You know, I've now had to be without my husband for, I mean, it's 10 months now, and for four months of that, I wasn't even allowed to see him. I now can get to see him, but I have to have what I have called our babysitter in order to see him, because we are on order that we cannot talk about the case. And, you know, that's really difficult, because there's so, I mean, that's what our lives are about right now. And I've had to pick up trying to take care of our home. Which it was, you know, we had divided things up. There were things that Ed took care of. There were things that I took care of. I've had to figure out finances so I can survive out here and pay, and, you know, raise money and try to pay, you know, for his defense. It took us until February to be able to hire proper a counselor for him so he would get the right defense on his side and work for him to get his freedom. I'm trying to hold my kids together who are very upset and worried about losing their dad. And listening to the news, cremate my husband on the news falsely. I mean, they virtually have, pronounced him guilty already, and he's not. He is innocent of this, and it's not easy. And in the meantime, worrying about my life because I know that, there's somebody that was out there to get me. And yes, Fairfax is still in jail, but he has an accomplice that had accompanied him putting that bomb on, and they won't do anything about him. He's still out here. And whoever is behind Larry Fairfax also to set up my husband. I virtually live in a fortress now because of that. I don't live alone anymore. I have brought people into my house, so I surround myself. And then through this, I have been trying to take care of my mom, who has had some very serious health issues. It has really been its own kind of hell. But on the flip side of that, I'm standing up strong as I can because I know it's the only way that we're going to have the opportunity and the chance to get my husband acquitted. And I don't have a choice. I have to stay strong because it's the only way. Otherwise, my husband faces a life in prison. And that is a death sentence.
Where did this Larry Fairfax come? How did he get into your life? And I have to tell you, I suspect, because they've been after me, trying to kill me, trying to destroy me, trying to put me in jail, I suspect the ADL, or Southern Poverty Law, to be behind this. And Edgar's been fighting those two organizations as long as I have, just about. Do you have any insight into that and to their involvement in this? Did they bring Larry Fairfax in? I mean, what did he do? Did he stole $45,000 worth of silver from you guys? What did he do? Turn around and tell the FBI, "Oh, Edgar gave me that"? I mean, hasn't he been charged with that kind of theft?
Well, that's what he has told him. Except he only claims that it was only so far that he had only gotten $10,000 of silver. So I question. And nobody has bothered to even look into where the other $35,000 is. I'm sure he's got it hid somewhere. But yes, that's what they're claiming, that's what the Fairfax received as payment. No, he didn't receive that as payment. He stole that from us. And they won't look into it. They just brushed it aside.
What about the ADL or SPLC? I mean, they have been kind of controlling they've been feeding this kind of bogus information about people like me and Edgar to the FBI, to Homeland Security, and they've been doing that for years.
They are strongly suspected. One of the first news reports that came out, Mark Potok was on immediately being interviewed and giving his side of his beliefs on Ed's involvement in this. I mean, he's from the East Coast, and they're telling me that, this has nothing to do with them. But then they're immediately on the news, and they're the organization that 10 years ago got on the phone and were calling our children and me and my husband and threatening our lives. And the one to me the threat was that the FBI would love to see us dead. So, do I suspect them? Definitely.
Wesley, you put it better than I think I have. You said that the SPLC and the ADL, they're the hate groups. It's not us. We don't hate nobody. I don't hate nobody. I kick people out of my chat rooms when they talk bad about Jews or try to lump everybody into one category. All blacks are thieves, all Muslims are terrorists, and all Jews are bankers. I mean, it ain't the way it is. But these two organizations, they are hate groups. They are trying to demonize Americans, and they've been after me and Edgar for 20 years.
Well, the only free speech they understand is their freedom to speak freely, and because they have bought political power. They have raised $200 million, and they now have a seat on the internal committee of the Homeland Security. That means they have an inside track to get a hold of the FBI, to influence the FBI, to file charges against people like Edgar Steele, against whom they have a grudge. And believe me, this is an old grudge. Since Edgar stepped up to represent the Aryan nation back in the year 2000, it's the church. It was some I don't know the name of it, but it's Richard Butler's church of something or other. But anyway, it was a freedom of religion and freedom of press and freedom of speech issue back then. They filed a civil lawsuit. They won. Fine, but they've held a grudge against Mr. Steele because he had the unmitigated temerity to defend them and to try to break down the attacks of the SPLC. So you have a hate, and they are a hate group. Boy, they have designated Edgar's website, the website, to Free Edgar Steele website, as a hate group. I mean, these people are ridiculous. But you see, they have raised so much money, they have so many people contributing and donating money to them that they have to perform. What do they have to perform? Well, they were the bully buster, the original bully buster that went around and got people that were burning crosses on lawns, and they were lynching people down in the South and burning churches and so on. They went after those people, and they got them, and they were right. But you know what? They now have to perform on a much broader spectrum. They have to have more people on their hate list, and they've run out of people who are really bad people. So now they're going after good people, and they're just calling them bad. They're just, it's ridiculous, Clay, how they can just designate somebody as a hate person or a hate group, and bingo, they're immediately their reputation is ruined. Well, they have so much political squeeze that because they have so much money, they're able to do this. It's all about money, and of course they're controlled by the international bankers as well, and as a result you have the same plot. It serves the international bankers to get rid of dissidents like Edgar Steele and David Hinkson. David Hinkson was a radio talk personality back in the 90s, and he had controversial people on his show, people that talked about the IRS and lots of things, and you know what? The government wanted to get rid of him. It was a freedom of speech issue in his case. So basically you have these rogue organizations who don't have any respect for anyone else's rights, and they think they're the only ones. Edgar Steele said, equal rights for all, special rights for none. Well, what these people believe is they should have special rights, and they are executing special rights, and they are pushing people around. They are now, the bully buster has become the bully.
All right, hold on just a second.